And joining me now to talk about a lot of things on this day of many, many developments, our friend, the New York Times columnist Tom Friedman, CBS News foreign correspondent, all-star correspondent Clarissa Ward, and plus we welcome the managing editor of Time magazine, Radhika Jones. Welcome to you, Radhika, and our friend Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic and Bloomberg View. Let's start first on the Iran thing. What do you take from what the Iranian Foreign Minister told Liz Palmer this morning, Tom?
Not much, Bob. The fact is that the Iranians aren't in these negotiations by accident or for tourism. Let's go back to the Iranian election that brought the foreign minister and the new president Rouhani to power. 6 men were allowed to run in that election. They were called, their names were Mr. Black, Mr. Black, Mr. Black, Mr. Black, Mr. Black, Mr. Light Black. And it turns out that 51% of Iranians all rushed to the guy who's just a little more moderate than anybody else. Actually, the word is they're actually 64%, but the government said, let's just keep this to 51%. And what were they saying? They're saying, we're tired of the sanctions. We're tired of being disconnected from the world. We already gave you one green revolution. Would you like another? Okay. So the Iranians are in these negotiations for regime survival and perpetuation. And the fact that we sent them a little signal early on, which is don't think that because we're going to these 6-month negotiations, that it's now green light or yellow light for companies to come back and start breaking the sanctions. They'll be back. They're not there by accident.
Jeffrey, we're obviously seeing a change in tone. But obviously, for these things to be successful, there has to be a change in more than just the tone.
The amazing thing about this process is that nothing has actually happened. I mean, the interim agreement has not even been implemented. The talks that he temporarily suspended were just technical talks to move toward implementation of an interim agreement. So we don't know where this is going. I believe that the Iranian regime, the president and the foreign minister, are authorized to freeze in place, but I don't get the sense that they're authorized to actually dismantle the program. So the hard stuff hasn't even begun. You see all these mini eruptions, but we haven't even begun to see how difficult this is going to be.
Well, Radhika, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Are we wasting our time doing this, or should we be at the table?
I think we should be at the table. I mean, as Jeffrey said, we're in the run-up to an interim deal, so it's very much in the future. But I don't think the feeling on that has changed.
What about you, Clarissa?
Well, I just would like to see, in the context of this discussion about Iran and this rapprochement, more attention paid to Syria. I know I've become this sort of tedious bore who's constantly talking about Syria, but I would like to see any rapprochement with Iran be based on some kind of action from Iran in terms of reining in President Assad, who they are essentially virtually single-handedly financially and militarily supporting. I think it's essential to see Iran play a more active role in facilitating some type of a peace agreement in Syria.
But that's, I mean, I agree. I agree with you, but it's a lovely fantasy. I mean, the Obama administration has 2 agreements with despotic regimes right now in the Middle East: Syria to get rid of the chemical weapons, and Iran to begin negotiating on the nuclear file. There doesn't seem to be any interest on the Obama administration to open other files. Iran is the major state sponsor of terror in the world, and there's not an interest in discussing that, and there doesn't seem to be much interest in discussing Syria. So I don't think we're going anywhere.
I think as a result of that, the administration has a reputation in the Middle East for having a complete lack of coherence and consistency in its policies there. And while they have been good at sort of spying opportunities and zoning in on those, and even taking risks to do so, there really is a stunning lack of clarity when it comes to a larger policy in that region.
Yeah, I would say, though, the Middle East has a reputation for not getting along with itself. And and at some point we have to decide when, how much do we invest in trying to sort out a fight between Sunnis and Shiites that dates to the 7th century, and how much, having tried this now in Afghanistan and Iraq, do we simply sit back, let this fire burn out, and hopefully come in at a later stage? I think if you want to talk seriously about Syria, you have to talk about an international force that goes in, evicts Assad, controls the border, takes out the bad guys, and tries to build a center. It's a 20-year project.
Never going to happen in this climate.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually what we tried to do in Iraq, is it not?
Yeah, it did work out real well.
Yeah, well, I think we have a distinct allergy to that kind of state-building exercise.
And we tried in Afghanistan.
And with good reason. But while this war of attrition is going on and on in Syria, you are seeing the makings of potentially a Somalia on the Mediterranean, which will have ramifications for all of us.
But isn't it still the case that it's extremely hard to know who to support in Syria? And
of course.
That's
And we have royally screwed the pooch on that front. We gave too little, too late to guys who, quite frankly, didn't have any traction on the ground.
And the issue Tom raises is, do you let it burn out? But in the burning, do you get burnt yourself? I mean, if large swaths of Syria become al-Qaeda safe havens, then 2016, 2017, we might be talking about having to invade, God forbid, parts of Syria to eradicate al-Qaeda. We've done that one before quite a bit.
Well, does anyone think anything is going to come of this? These talks?
The Syria talks? Or
Well,
the Iran
then-
talks?
There's so many talks that nothing can come from.
All of this.
Which impossible problem are you talking about, Bob?
You can do your show from Geneva for the next 3 years with these talks.
No, but do we think these Geneva talks, that in the end something is going to happen here?
I would say yes. I do think something is going to happen, but I think it's hard to know how long it will take to see any results from it, if that makes sense.
Something will happen if the United States and the Soviet Union decide to get together to make something happen. But that ties back to the Ukraine story, Bob. We decided a decade and a half ago that we thought it was more important to have the Czech Navy, in the NATO alliance than try to build a bridge to the Soviet Union. We opted for NATO expansion over basically trying to build a relationship with a democratic Soviet Union. And that's been not democratic Russia, and that's been the gift that keeps on giving. Okay, look, we are in Ukraine. Look, my heart goes out. I'm with entirely Ukrainians who want a future with the West. I appreciate that. But let's not forget where Ukraine is vis-a-vis the Soviet Union, how we've treated the Soviet Union, and why we have a Putin who finds it wonderful to run against the West and NATO domestically because of something that goes back 15 years ago. So this isn't happening out of any in a vacuum.
Well, that brings us to John McCain, who's in Ukraine. He's in Kiev this morning. You just heard him. He told the Ukrainian people, he spoke to the demonstrators. He said, "We are for you, and the United States is with you." I think John McCain is with them. I want to check and see how far that extends in the United States.
I mean, I think, as Tom said, it's hard. We have it in our DNA to love the sight of free protesters out in the square. The colder, the better, and that's what McCain was talking about. But ultimately, it's really the European Union's fight. It's not the United States' fight, and it's very difficult to imagine a scenario in which the threats that Putin is making about withholding trade agreements and what have you are able to be resisted. We know Putin, he's very irresistible.
I think the American people are emotionally with the Ukrainians. I think the Obama administration, like a lot of issues, seems less interested in engaging. I mean, the perfect example is 2009 in Iran, when there was the Green Revolution, and the Obama administration was very hesitant to say, you guys are standing for what we stand for. I think today, I think Senator McCain is on to something. I think that protesters look to America for moral leadership on these issues. Obviously, it's a complicated issue with Russia and the EU, and the EU plays the primary role, but there could be more that the Americans can do to stand up for our values.
What do you think, Tom? Do you think John McCain should have gone and talked to the protesters?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, it warms my heart to see us siding, with people who want to build a future, with the West. But this, again, not happening in a vacuum. This is happening in a country that's really screwed up its domestic politics, has been incapable of implementing reforms. Again, when people build statues of liberty and carry them in their Independence Square, I'm a sucker for that as much as anybody else. But ultimately, people,
to back it up?
Are they willing to and able to back it up?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not always just about us.
Absolutely.
And we infantilize them. We're not the only subjects. They are not just objects. What we do or don't do isn't the only thing. And sometimes people look at South Africa. I mean, yes, we were part of that sanctions regime that certainly built pressure. But ultimately, what made the difference? They had a leader who was ready to reach out to the other side and challenge his own base.
If there's a theme, for the past couple of weeks, it's that where are the other Mandelas? I mean, Iran, Israel, Palestine, Syria, Ukraine. I mean, it's remarkable how rare a personality he was when you look at leadership in the world today.
When you think about what's going on in all these countries, you either have, it seems to me, one of three things. You either have an external midwife who comes in and tries to make the transition from authoritarianism to some more democratic, pluralistic order. We tried that in Iraq and Afghanistan, and largely did not succeed. Or you have a domestic military, like Egypt has, that maybe can make that transition, maybe not, big question mark there. Or you have a Mandela. But if you have no Mandela, no military, no midwife, you have Syria.
You know, I'm really struck by that when you said that, because I've never been one who believed in the tides of history. I think individuals make history, and I think individuals make the difference. And I think the great lesson in Mandela here is for all of us to step back and realize he was a person who led. He was, you know, he wasn't worried about getting a primary opponent. He went out and stood for what he thought was right, and that does make a difference.
He challenged his base, Bob. Look at these knuckleheads in the Senate, you know, the Republican side. Now, these guys, are they really worried about agreeing to this minor, you know, budget deal? And they're all, you know, not one of them is a profile in courage in the least, and we're going to lecture Ukrainians on what to do?
You know, Bob, something you said just really struck me. You know, everyone makes choices. Bashar al-Assad made a choice to murder his countrymen in order to stay in power. You know, think about the power of personality and character and compare that to Mandela. It's really astonishing.
We have to leave it right there. Thank you all so much for really adding some context this morning. We'll be back.